In the quiet town of Maplewood, life moved at a slow and steady rhythm. The streets were lined with old oak trees whose branches swayed gently in the breeze. People knew each other by name, and everyone seemed to have a place they belonged. But, for Ethan, a 12-year-old boy with messy brown hair and wide, curious eyes, belonging was a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. Ethan had lived in Maplewood his whole life, but everything changed 2 years ago when his parents died in a car accident. Since then, he'd been staying with his uncle, a man named Robert, who wasn't mean or cruel but simply distant. Robert worked long hours at the factory and often forgot to ask Ethan how his day went. Meals were eaten in silence and conversations were rare. Ethan spent most of his time alone, either reading books at the library or wandering around the town's small park. On one particular afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting on a wooden bench near the center of the park. It was late September, and the air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves. He hugged his knees to his chest and stared blankly at the ground. His backpack lay beside him, filled with school books he didn't feel like opening. Homework felt pointless when there was no one to care if he did well or not. As Ethan sat there lost in thought, an elderly man approached slowly, leaning on a cane with every step. His name was Harold, though Ethan didn't know that yet. Harold wore a faded brown jacket over a plaid shirt, and his gray hair stuck out slightly beneath his cap. His face was lined with wrinkles, but his blue eyes still sparkled with kindness. He paused for a moment before lowering himself carefully onto the bench next to Ethan. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Harold glanced sideways at the boy, noticing the sadness etched into his young features. Finally, breaking the silence, Harold said softly, "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." Ethan turned his head sharply, surprised to hear someone address him. At first he didn't say anything, unsure of how to respond. Then, after a brief hesitation, he mumbled, "I guess I do." Harold nodded as if he understood completely. "Mind telling me about it?" he asked, his tone gentle and inviting. Ethan hesitated again. He wasn't used to sharing his thoughts with anyone, let alone a stranger, but something about Harold's calm demeanor made him feel safe. After a deep breath, Ethan began talking, not about the accident or the pain of losing his parents, but about smaller things, how hard it was to focus in school, how lonely he felt sometimes, and how much he missed having someone to talk to. Harold listened intently, nodding occasionally and offering words of encouragement when appropriate. When Ethan finally ran out of things to say, Harold smiled warmly and said, "You know, I used to sit right here on this bench years ago, feeling pretty much the same way you do now." That caught Ethan's attention. "Really?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Oh yes," Harold replied. "Back then I was younger, of course, but loneliness doesn't care about age. Sometimes it hits us hardest when we least expect it." He paused for a moment, looking off into the distance as if recalling memories from long ago. "But you know what helped me get through it?" "What?" Ethan asked eagerly. "Talking to people," Harold answered simply. "Finding someone willing to listen and being willing to listen in return. That's how connections are made, and those connections can change everything." Ethan frowned slightly, trying to process what Harold meant. Connection sounded nice in theory, but he couldn't imagine forming one with anyone in Maplewood. Most kids his age already had their own groups of friends, and adults seemed too busy to notice him. Sensing Ethan's doubt, Harold chuckled lightly. "It doesn't happen overnight," he explained. "Sometimes it starts with just one person, a chance meeting. Like ours today. You never know where it might lead." The two sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the leaves drift lazily to the ground. Eventually, Harold stood up, gripping his cane firmly. "Well, I should be heading home," he said. "But I hope to see you around, Ethan. Maybe we'll chat again sometime." Ethan blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" he asked. Harold grinned mischievously. "I've seen you around town before. Plus, your backpack says Ethan right there." He pointed to the worn label stitched onto the side of the bag. Ethan laughed for the first time in what felt like ages. "Oh yeah, thanks. Harold," the older man supplied. "My name's Harold." Thanks, Harold, Ethan said, smiling Cheyenne in gratitude. As Harold walked away, Ethan realized he felt lighter somehow, as if some of the heaviness he'd been carrying had lifted, even if only a little. For the first time in a long time, he looked forward to returning to the park tomorrow, hoping to see Harold again. Little did he know, that simple encounter would set the stage for an extraordinary journey neither of them could have anticipated. The next day, Ethan couldn't wait to get to the park. He hurried through his morning routine, ate a quick breakfast, and left the house before his uncle even woke up. As he walked to the park, he kept thinking about Harold and their conversation from the previous afternoon. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of excitement, something he hadn't felt since his parents passed away. When he arrived at the park, Ethan scanned the area, looking for the familiar figure with the cane. Sure enough, Harold was already there, sitting on the same bench as before. This time, though, he had a book open on his lap. When Harold saw Ethan approaching, he closed the book and smiled warmly. "Well, look who's here," Harold said, patting the space beside him. "I thought you might come back." Ethan grinned as he sat down. "I wanted to see if you'd be here," he admitted. "And I wanted to ask you something." "Oh?" Harold raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" "You said connections can change everything," Ethan began hesitantly. "But how do you even start making one? I mean, most people don't even notice me." Harold chuckled softly. "That's a good question," he said. "Connections usually start with small steps. A smile, a kind word, or just being willing to listen. You and we've already started one, haven't we?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I guess so. But what if it doesn't last? What if you stop coming to the park?" Harold shook his head. "If two people want to stay connected, they find a way. And I have no plans of disappearing anytime soon." He leaned closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Besides, Ethan, I think you're worth staying for." Those words hit Ethan like a wave of warmth. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. It made him feel special, important, even if only to one person. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Harold became regular companions in the park. They talked about all sorts of things: school, books, hobbies, and even dreams. Ethan learned that Harold used to be a history teacher and loved sharing fascinating stories about ancient civilizations and world-changing events. In turn, Ethan told Harold about his own interests, how he enjoyed building things out of scraps he found around the house, and dreamed of becoming an inventor someday. One sunny afternoon, as they sat chatting, Harold suddenly reached into his bag and pulled out a dusty old notebook. Its cover was worn, and its pages were yellowed with age. "Here," Harold said, handing it to Ethan. "Take a look at this." Curious, Ethan opened the notebook and flipped through its pages. Inside were sketches, diagrams, and handwritten notes detailing ideas for inventions. Some of them looked complicated, while others seemed surprisingly simple. One section caught Ethan's eye, a detailed plan for a device designed to harness solar energy more efficiently. "This is amazing," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "Did you make all these?" Harold nodded. "Years ago, when I was younger, I used to dream of creating something that could change the world. That solar generator was my biggest idea, but life got in the way, and I never finished it." Ethan looked up at Harold, his heart racing with excitement. "Why not try again?" he asked. "You could still build it." Harold sighed wistfully. "I'm afraid my days of tinkering are behind me," he said, "but maybe someone else could pick up where I left off." Ethan stared at the notebook, his mind buzzing with possibilities. What if I tried?" he suggested tentatively. "I mean, I don't know much about solar energy yet, but I could learn. Maybe together we could figure it out." Harold's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and pride. "You'd really want to do that?" he asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied eagerly. "It sounds incredible. Plus, it's exactly the kind of thing I've always wanted to work on." Harold smiled and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Then let's give it a shot," he said. "We'll take it one step at a time, and I'll help you every step of the way. From that moment on, their meetings in the park took on a new purpose. Instead of just talking, they began brainstorming ideas and sketching designs. Harold explained scientific concepts to Ethan, breaking them down into simple terms that he could understand. Ethan soaked up the knowledge like a sponge, asking questions and jotting down notes whenever inspiration struck. Their partnership quickly turned into a friendship, unlike any other. For Ethan, having Harold as a mentor gave him confidence and direction. He realized that he wasn't alone anymore. Someone believed in him and his abilities. For Harold, mentoring Ethan brought back a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Watching the boy's enthusiasm reignited his passion for innovation and reminded him of the dreams he once held dear. As the weeks went by, Ethan threw himself into learning everything he could about renewable energy. He spent hours after school, at the library reading books and articles recommended by Harold. At home, he experimented with basic materials, trying to recreate some of the concepts they discussed. His uncle barely noticed the change in Ethan, too preoccupied with work to pay attention. But Ethan didn't mind. He had Harold now, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and Harold sat side by side on their favorite bench, reviewing progress on their project. The air was cool and the sky glowed orange and pink. Ethan held up a crude prototype he'd built using parts scavenged from old electronics. "It's not perfect," Ethan admitted, scratching the back of his neck nervously, "but it works at least a little bit." Harold examined the contraption carefully, his eyes twinkling with pride. "This is fantastic, Ethan," he said. "You've done incredible work. With a few tweaks, I think we can make it even better." Ethan beamed at the praise. "And do you really think so?" "I know so," Harold replied firmly. "You've got a gift, Ethan. Don't ever doubt that." Encouraged by Harold's faith in him, Ethan redoubled his efforts. Together they refined the design, testing and improving it over countless afternoons in the park. Each success, no matter how small, filled Ethan with a sense of accomplishment he'd never known before, and each setback became an opportunity to learn and grow. Through it all, their bond deepened. They weren't just mentor and student anymore. They were friends, partners, and confidants. Harold shared stories of his late wife, Margaret, and how she had supported his wild ideas when no one else did. Ethan, in turn, opened up about his parents, recounting happy memories and moments of laughter. Their conversations became a safe space where both could heal from past wounds and look toward the future with hope. By the end of the summer, Ethan and Harold had created a working model of their solar-powered generator. It was compact, efficient, and capable of powering small appliances. Though far from perfect, it was proof that their hard work had paid off. Standing in the park, watching the tiny machine hum to life, Ethan felt a surge of pride unlike anything he'd experienced before. "We did it," he said, turning to Harold with a grin. "Yes, we did," Harold agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And this is just the beginning, Ethan. Just imagine what else you can achieve." Little did they know, their invention would soon attract attention far beyond Maplewood. Their journey was only getting started, and the impact of their unexpected friendship would ripple across the world in ways neither of them could have imagined. As autumn rolled into Maplewood, Ethan and Harold continued refining their solar-powered generator. The device had come a long way from its humble beginnings as a rough prototype made of scavenged parts. Now, it was sleeker, more efficient, and capable of powering larger appliances for longer periods. Every day after school, Ethan would rush to the park with his latest improvements tucked under his arm, eager to show Harold what he'd accomplished. Harold was always there waiting, his cane resting against the bench as he watched Ethan approach. His face lit up whenever he saw the boy's excitement, and he listened intently as Ethan explained each new feature or tweak. Sometimes Harold offered suggestions based on his years of teaching science, helping Ethan solve problems he hadn't even noticed yet. Other times he simply nodded and smiled, letting Ethan take the lead. "You're doing amazing work," Harold told him one crisp October afternoon. "I'm proud of you." Ethan blushed at the compliment but felt a warm glow inside. Thanks, Harold, he said quietly. But none of this would have been possible without your help. That's not true, Harold replied firmly. You're the one who's put in all the effort. All I did was point you in the right direction. Even though Ethan didn't fully agree, he appreciated Harold's humility. Over the months, they had developed a rhythm that worked perfectly for both of them. Harold provided guidance and wisdom, while Ethan brought energy, creativity, and determination. Together, they balanced each other out, forming a team stronger than either could have been alone. One day, as they sat discussing ways to improve the generator's battery life, Harold suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought about entering this invention into a competition?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "A competition?" he repeated. "Like a science fair?" "Exactly," Harold said, nodding enthusiastically. "There's a statewide science fair coming up next month. It's a great opportunity to showcase your work and see how it compares to others." Ethan frowned, uncertainty creeping into his expression. "I don't know," he said hesitantly. "What if people laugh at it or say it's not good enough?" Harold leaned forward, his voice steady and reassuring. "Ethan, listen to me. This invention is something special. You've poured your heart and soul into it, and it shows. Don't let fear hold you back from sharing it with the world." "But what if I mess up during the presentation?" Ethan pressed. "What if I freeze or forget what to say?" Harold chuckled softly. "Then we'll practice until you feel ready. I'll be here every step of the way, helping you prepare. Trust me, you'll do fine." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. The idea of presenting his invention in front of judges and other students terrified him, but deep down, he also felt a flicker of excitement. What if Harold was right? What if this was his chance to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself? Finally, Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's try it." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into preparing for the science fair. With Harold by his side, he practiced explaining the generator's design and functionality until he could recite it in his sleep. They rehearsed answering potential questions from judges and brainstormed ways to make the display stand out. Harold encouraged Ethan to focus on the story behind the invention, their unlikely friendship, the challenges they overcame, and the hope they wanted to inspire in others. "You're not just showing off a machine," Harold reminded him. "You're telling a story about perseverance, collaboration, and believing in yourself. That's what will resonate with people." On the morning of the science fair, Ethan woke up feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. He dressed carefully, packed up the generator, and headed to the community center where the event was being held. Harold accompanied him, walking slowly but steadily with his cane. As they entered the bustling room filled with projects and participants, Ethan felt his stomach churn with anxiety. "You've got this," Harold whispered, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Just breathe and remember why you're here." Ethan nodded, gripping the handle of his project box tightly. One by one, the other students presented their inventions: robots, apps, chemical experiments, all impressive in their own right. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if his generator would seem small or insignificant compared to theirs. When it was finally his turn, Ethan stepped up to his display table and took a deep breath. He glanced at Harold, who stood nearby with an encouraging smile, and began speaking. At first his voice trembled, but as he talked about the inspiration behind the invention and demonstrated how it worked, he grew more confident. By the time he finished, the judges were nodding approvingly and several spectators had gathered around to ask questions. Afterward, Harold approached Ethan, his eyes shining with pride. "That was fantastic," he said. "You should be so proud of yourself." "I couldn't have done it without you," Ethan replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me." The results of the competition weren't announced until later that evening. Ethan tried to stay calm, but his heart raced as the judges returned to the stage. When they called his name as the winner of the first-place award, Ethan froze in disbelief. Harold nudged him gently, urging him to go accept the trophy. As the crowd applauded, Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he truly felt like he belonged. News of Ethan's invention spread quickly throughout Maplewood. Local newspapers wrote articles about the boy inventor and his groundbreaking solar-powered generator. Teachers at Ethan's school praised his achievement, and classmates who had barely acknowledged him before suddenly wanted to be his friend. Even his Uncle Robert seemed impressed, asking Ethan questions about the project and congratulating him on his success. But the attention didn't stop there. Within days, environmental organizations and tech companies reached out, eager to learn more about the generator and its potential applications. One company offered to fund further development, while another invited Ethan and Harold to present their invention at a global summit on sustainable energy. At first, Ethan was overwhelmed by the sudden interest. He worried that he wasn't smart enough or experienced enough to handle such big opportunities. But Harold reminded him of everything they had already achieved together. "You've already proven that you can rise to the occasion," Harold said. "Take it one step at a time, just like we always have." With Harold's support, Ethan agreed to attend the summit. A few months later, they traveled to a large conference center in a nearby city, where inventors, scientists, and policymakers from around the world had gathered to discuss solutions to the planet's most pressing environmental challenges. Standing beside Harold, Ethan marveled at the diversity of ideas and innovations on display. When it was their turn to present, Ethan spoke confidently, sharing the story of how he and Harold had turned a simple idea into a working prototype. He emphasized the importance of collaboration and perseverance, crediting Harold for his invaluable guidance. By the end of the presentation, the audience erupted into applause, and several attendees approached them afterward to express their admiration. One influential leader, a woman named Rachel Hayes, was particularly impressed. She invited Ethan and Harold to collaborate with her organization to scale up production of the generator and distribute it to communities in need. Thanks to her connections and resources, the project gained momentum faster than either of them had imagined. Within a year, factories began producing thousands of compact solar-powered generators. These devices were sent to remote villages, disaster relief zones, and underserved areas around the world. Families who had once relied on dangerous kerosene lamps now had reliable electricity, transforming their daily lives. Children could study at night, doctors could operate clinics safely, and businesses could thrive despite lacking access to traditional power grids. Ethan became a symbol of hope for young innovators everywhere. Schools invited him to speak to students about following their dreams, and media outlets hailed him as a role model for future generations. Meanwhile, Harold found renewed purpose in seeing his lifelong dream come true. Though he often joked that he was too old to care about fame, he couldn't hide his pride in what they had accomplished together. But beyond the accolades and achievements, the most profound change was personal. Ethan no longer felt like an outsider. He had found a family in Harold. And Harold, who had once thought his best days were behind him, discovered that his legacy would live on through Ethan. As they stood together one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, Harold placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You know," he said softly, "we may not have set out to change the world, but sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest impacts." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. "We did it together," he replied, "and I think we're just getting started." Little did they know, their journey was far from over. Their invention had sparked a movement, inspiring countless others to dream big and work toward a brighter future. Through their unexpected bond, an orphaned boy and a lonely elderly man had proven that even the simplest connections could create extraordinary legacies. The success of Ethan's invention didn't just change his life and Harold's, it changed the lives of millions of people around the world. The solar-powered generator, now called the SunSpark, became a symbol of hope and progress. It was small enough to fit in a backpack, but powerful enough to provide electricity for entire households. For families living in remote areas without access to power grids, the SunSpark was nothing short of miraculous. Ethan and Harold traveled to villages where the device had been distributed. They met children who could finally study after dark, mothers who no longer had to cook over open flames, and farmers who used the generator to power irrigation systems. Everywhere they went, people greeted them with gratitude and admiration. Ethan, who had once felt invisible, now found himself surrounded by smiling faces and heartfelt thanks. One day in a small village nestled in the mountains of Nepal, Ethan met a girl named Maya. She was about his age with bright eyes and a shy smile. Maya told him how her family had struggled before receiving the sunspark. Her father worked long hours in the fields, and her mother wove textiles by hand to sell at the market. With the generator, they were able to use a sewing machine to make clothes faster and earn more money. Maya herself dreamed of becoming a teacher someday, and now she had light to read her schoolbooks at night. Listening to Maya's story, Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He realized that the invention wasn't just a machine. It was a tool that gave people opportunities they never thought possible. As they prepared to leave the village, Maya handed Ethan a handmade bracelet as a token of appreciation. "Thank you for believing in us," she said softly. That moment stayed with Ethan long after they returned home. It reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but to help others. Harold noticed the shift in Ethan's perspective and smiled knowingly. "You're growing up, my boy," he said one evening as they sat together on their favorite park bench. "You're starting to see the bigger picture." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I just didn't realize how much one idea could do," he admitted. "It makes me want to keep going, to find new ways to help." Harold placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's the mark of a true innovator," he said, "but don't forget to take care of yourself along the way. You've already done so much." Despite the incredible impact of the sunspark, Ethan and Harold faced challenges too. Some critics argued that the generator was too expensive to produce on a large scale, while others dismissed it as a temporary solution to deeper systemic issues. A few companies even tried to copy the design and claim it as their own. But Ethan refused to let negativity discourage him. With Harold's guidance, he learned how to handle criticism gracefully and focus on the positive changes their work was creating. One of the biggest hurdles came when Ethan was invited to speak at a prestigious university. He had been asked to deliver a keynote address at a conference about renewable energy. While it was an honor, Ethan felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. What could he, a 12-year-old boy from Maplewood, possibly say to a room full of experts and scholars? "You tell your story," Harold advised during one of their practice sessions. "Share what inspired you, how you overcame obstacles, and why you believe in the power of innovation. That's what will resonate with them." The day of the speech, Ethan stood nervously behind the podium, staring out at the sea of faces in the auditorium. He took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. He talked about losing his parents, feeling alone, and finding purpose through his friendship with Harold. He described the countless hours they spent working on the sunspark, the failures they endured, and the joy of seeing their invention bring light to dark corners of the world. By the time he finished, the audience erupted into applause. Dozens of people approached him afterward to shake his hand and thank him for his inspiring words. One professor even offered Ethan a scholarship to attend the university when he was older. Though Ethan politely declined, Maplewood was still his home. He couldn't help but feel proud of what he had accomplished. As the months passed, Ethan continued to grow both personally and professionally. He collaborated with scientists and engineers to improve the sunspark, making it more efficient and affordable. He also began mentoring other young inventors, encouraging them to pursue their ideas no matter how impossible they seemed. Through workshops and online tutorials, he shared the lessons he had learned from Harold, the importance of perseverance, teamwork, and believing in oneself. For Harold, watching Ethan thrive filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. He often reflected on how different his life might have been if someone had encouraged him to pursue his dreams decades earlier. Now, through Ethan, he saw those dreams come to life in ways he never imagined. Their partnership inspired others to form similar connections. Teachers began pairing students with senior citizens for mentorship programs, hoping to replicate the magic of Ethan and Harold's relationship. Community centers organized events where people of all ages could collaborate on projects aimed at solving real-world problems. The ripple effect of their bond spread far beyond Maplewood, touching lives across the globe. Even as their fame grew, Ethan and Harold remained grounded. They still met every afternoon in the park, sitting on their weathered bench beneath the towering oak trees. Sometimes they talked about new inventions or upcoming trips. Other times they simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. No matter how busy life got, they always made time for these moments together. One crisp winter morning, as snow blanketed the ground and the air smelled of pine, Ethan arrived at the park carrying a thermos of hot cocoa. He found Harold bundled up in a thick coat, his breath visible in the cold air. They sipped their drinks side by side, watching the sun rise over the horizon. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a while. "We should write a book." "A book?" Harold asked, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of book?" "One about us," Ethan explained. "About how we met, how we built the sun spark, and everything we've learned along the way. I think it could inspire people to chase their dreams, no matter their age." Harold chuckled softly. "Now that's an idea worth exploring," said, "but only if you promise to let me proofread it. My handwriting may be shaky, but I can still spot a misplaced comma from a mile away." Ethan laughed, nodding enthusiastically. "Deal." Over the next several weeks, they worked on drafting chapters for the book. Ethan wrote about his early struggles and the loneliness he felt after losing his parents. Harold contributed stories, from his teaching days and reflections on the importance of lifelong learning. Together, they wove their experiences into a narrative that celebrated the power of connection and collaboration. When the book was finally published, it became an instant bestseller. Readers of all ages were moved by the story of an orphaned boy and a lonely elderly man who changed history together. Schools added it to their curriculums, and community groups used it as a guide for fostering intergenerational relationships. Through it all, Ethan and Harold stayed humble. They knew that their success wasn't just about talent or hard work. It was about the simple act of reaching out to someone in need. By forming a bond based on trust, respect, and shared dreams, they had created something far greater than either of them could have achieved alone. As the years went by, Harold grew frailer, his steps slower and his voice softer, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. He continued to support Ethan, offering advice and encouragement whenever needed. And Ethan, now a teenager, carried Harold's lessons with him wherever he went. One evening, as they sat under the stars in the park, Harold turned to Ethan with a gentle smile. "You know," he said, "when I first saw you sitting here all those years ago, I never imagined we'd end up like this." "Like what?" Ethan asked curiously. "Changing the world," Harold replied simply. "But here we are, proving that even the smallest spark can light up the darkest corners." Ethan smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "We did it together," he said softly, "and I'll never forget that." Though Harold eventually passed away a few years later, his legacy lived on, not just in the Sunspark or the book, but in the countless lives he and Ethan had touched. Ethan carried their story forward, ensuring that future generations would remember the unlikely friendship that changed history forever. Years had passed since Ethan first sat on that park bench, unsure of his place in the world. Now, as he stood on a stage at a prestigious university, accepting an honorary doctorate for his contributions to renewable energy, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. The audience was filled with students, professors, and dignitaries, all clapping enthusiastically as Ethan shook hands with the chancellor. Yet, despite the grandeur of the moment, his thoughts kept drifting back to Harold. Ethan stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone slightly. He looked out at the sea of faces before him, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady but warm. "This award is not just mine. It belongs to someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The crowd grew quiet, leaning forward to hear more. Ethan took a deep breath and continued. His name was Harold. He was an elderly man I met by chance one afternoon in a park. At the time, I was lost, lonely, uncertain, and convinced that my dreams were too big for someone like me. But Harold saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He taught me that even the smallest actions can create ripples that change the world. Ethan paused, glancing down at the notes he had prepared. His eyes softened as memories flooded back. Their conversations under the oak trees, the countless hours they spent sketching designs, and the joy they shared when their invention finally worked. Harold gave me more than knowledge or guidance, Ethan said. He gave me hope. And together we built something that has brought light to millions of lives. The audience erupted into applause, but Ethan held up a hand to quiet them. What Harold and I did wasn't extraordinary because of our skills or resources, he explained. It was extraordinary because it proved that connection matters. When two people come together, no matter their age, background, or circumstances, they can achieve incredible things. Ethan went on to talk about the impact of the sun spark, sharing stories from communities around the world where the generator had transformed daily life. He spoke of children studying under electric lamps for the first time, farmers increasing their yields thanks to powered irrigation systems, and families no longer relying on dangerous kerosene stoves. Each story underscored the importance of innovation driven by compassion. As he concluded his speech, Ethan's voice grew softer, tinged with emotion. I stand here today not as a lone inventor, but as someone who was fortunate enough to find a mentor, a friend, and a partner. Harold may no longer be with us, but his spirit lives on in every child who studies by sunlight turned into electricity, in every family whose home is brighter and safer because of what we created together. When Ethan finished speaking, the auditorium erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and wiping away tears. Among the audience was Rachel Hayes, the environmental leader who had played a key role in scaling up production of the Sunspark. She approached Ethan after the ceremony, her eyes shining with admiration. "You've done something truly remarkable," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Not just with your invention, but with your message. The world needs more people like you and Harold." Ethan smiled gratefully. "Thank you," he replied. "But this isn't the end. There's still so much work to be done." That evening, Ethan returned to Maplewood. The town hadn't changed much over the years, though a new plaque now marked the park bench where he and Harold had first met. Engraved on it were the words, "Here, an unexpected friendship sparked a revolution." Ethan often visited the bench, sitting quietly and reflecting on everything that had happened since that fateful day. On this particular night, however, he wasn't alone. A group of young inventors from the local high school joined him, eager to hear his advice. They were part of a program Ethan had helped establish, designed to inspire teenagers to pursue careers in science and engineering. As they gathered around, Ethan shared stories of his journey, not just the successes, but also the failures and doubts he had faced along the way. "Remember," he told them, "innovation isn't about being perfect. It's about trying, failing, and trying again. And most importantly, it's about connecting with others. You don't have to do it alone." One of the students, a shy girl named Lily, hesitated before asking, "Do you ever feel scared? Like maybe you won't measure up?" Ethan nodded knowingly. "All the time," he admitted. "But fear doesn't stop me anymore because I know I'm not alone. Find your Harold, someone who believes in you, and let them guide you until you're ready to shine on your own." The students left inspired, buzzing with excitement about their own projects. Watching them walk away, Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that while Harold was gone, his influence lived on through these young minds. Every student Ethan mentored carried a piece of Harold's legacy with them, passing it forward to future generations. Later that week, Ethan received a letter from Maya, the girl he had met in Nepal years earlier. She wrote to thank him again for the Sunspark, explaining how it had changed her family's life. Her father had expanded his farming business, and her mother now ran a successful tailoring shop. Most importantly, Maya herself had graduated at the top of her class and earned a scholarship to study education at a university in Kathmandu. "I want to be a teacher," she wrote, "so I can help other kids like me chase their dreams." Thank you for showing me that anything is possible if you believe. Reading Maya's letter, Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes. He thought about how one small act of kindness, a gift of light, had set off a chain reaction of opportunities. It reminded him of Harold's favorite saying, "Even the smallest spark can light up the darkest corners." That phrase became Ethan's guiding principle as he continued his work. He traveled the world, meeting with innovators, policymakers, and activists who shared his vision of a brighter, more sustainable future. Together, they brainstormed solutions to global challenges, from climate change to poverty alleviation. Ethan never stopped dreaming, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Back in Maplewood, the park remained a special place for Ethan. On clear nights, he would sit on the bench beneath the stars, imagining Harold beside him. Though Harold was no longer physically present, Ethan could almost hear his voice offering wisdom and encouragement. One evening, as Ethan gazed up at the vast expanse of twinkling lights, he whispered, "We did good, Harold. Real good." That moment, Ethan understood that their bond transcended time and space. It was a connection forged not just by shared goals, but by mutual respect, trust, and love. Through their partnership, an orphaned boy and a lonely elderly man had proven that even the simplest relationships could leave an indelible mark on history. And so, Ethan carried Harold's memory with him wherever he went, ensuring that their story would continue to inspire others for generations to come. Their legacy wasn't written in gold or etched in stone. It was written in the hearts of those whose lives they touched. Together they had shown the world that true greatness lies not in individual achievements, but in the power of human connection to spark change.